Welcome to the First Things First podcast. And first things first, we need you to subscribe and leave comments, letting us know what you think of the show. We're listening. I'm Nick Wright, joined by two of my favorite people, Jenna Wolfe, Cris Carter. Now, let's get the show started.
Hi there, everyone, and welcome to First Things First. I'm Jenna Wolfe. That's the Hall of Famer, as always, Cris Carter, and that is Nick Wright. What's going on, boys? How's everybody doing today?
It's good.
Good.
Good morning.
Good day. Beautiful day. Might get some snow.
Yeah. Northeast is getting hammered
We're
a
gonna
little
get
bit.
more snow?
Once again.
Yeah.
Listen, you checked your Doppler?
Yes.
Is that your
Had
source?
to check.
Oh, my God.
It's a little cold in New England. Getting ready for the weekend. Might
What's it
make a
looking like in
transition.
Philly this weekend?
I don't want to get too far ahead of that. Okay, Wednesday.
Okay.
Doppler can change.
I got you.
And, you know, I got to watch it, though.
Okay, good to know.
I think you're going to be surprised by the weather in both NFC, AFC championship games.
Oh, okay. All right,
I like
interesting.
it. Well, for a very rainy New York City, we are in very, very good moods. Let us start with one of my favorite quotes of all time. Change nothing, and nothing changes. And never has that been more applicable than to and with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Want to change? Make a change. Mike Tomlin is just 3-5 in the playoffs since the Steelers' 2010 run to the Super Bowl, where they lost. According to some reports now, some of the team's limited partners are unhappy with the locker room distractions this season and some of the in-game coaching decisions, and as a result, they want a coaching change. CC, should Mike Tomlin be on the hot seat after the season that the Steelers had this year?
No, I don't think he should be on the hot seat. I think that anytime that you're in a business like we're in, where the expectations, and this is not for all 32 teams. All fans would be like, all teams are trying to win. Well, relatively. Some of them are trying to win at the bank, and the other ones are actually trying to win and put some Lombardi trophies. I believe there's like 12 teams in the NFL every year. From an organizational standpoint, they are actually trying to win the championship.
You said that a couple months ago, and it surprised Jen and I think it surprised the audience. You almost said in passing, everyone's not trying to win. They'd like to win, but they're not doing everything they can to win.
Right, or the franchise is not in a position that they could make that extra step, that they're a playoff team and they can compete for trophies either through their quarterback, lack of organization, lack of overall coaching, lack of support from the ownership, not connected to the community. There's a lot of different reasons why. But the Pittsburgh Steelers, as far as a head coaching, they have gotten this thing right. Not only like the last 4 or 5 years, let's try like the last 40 years, all right? Since 1969, I think.
They've only had 3 coaches.
3 coaches. And there's been tough spots with all of those. Chuck Noll, he had some tough spots. Man, Bill Cowher, good man. He had some tough spots there. But the Pittsburgh organization and their model, there was one thing I told you guys when the Giants were going through what they went through. There was a reason why I gave them that, because I respect them so much, because they go about doing things the right way. And that's the way Pittsburgh has been. Now, from an overall standpoint of are you happy with the product on the field, you could say, yes, I'm partially happy with the product. Is he developing players? Does he have a championship caliber team? Yes. But should they tinker with it just a little bit and maybe adjust? Yes. Because I just believe now in this modern day with social media and all the distractions that are available to professional athletes that you have to be more tight as far as your locker room. You can't allow distractions, because these are real. Now, these are grown people that are paid a lot of money, but when you don't have everyone pulling in the right direction, I believe a lot of that responsibility is on the head coach. I believe Mike Tomlin he is just under the great head coach. He's a good head coach. Now, if he wins another Super Bowl, you know, he's going to be put in the great category. Tony Dungy, people would say he's a great coach. How many Super Bowls did he win?
1.
1. Now, Mike Tomlin, because some other things, I respect Mike. I respect the way they teach football. But there's some little things that he could change in that organization that I would believe would lead Pittsburgh to getting over the top or creating a more consistent product.
Mike Tomlin is not a perfect head coach.
No.
The thing is, there are no perfect head coaches. Oh, what about Bill Belichick? Well, yeah, he's perfect if we want to ignore the multiple scandals that have been associated with that football team that have cost them draft picks. He's the closest we come to it, and even Belichick, you can find something to nitpick. I don't love the way Mike Tomlin runs the clock at the end of games, and that's a pet peeve of mine. I don't love the fact that Mike Tomlin seems to run such a loose ship that sometimes it gets away from him a little bit, as we saw with the Antonio Brown Facebook Live at the end during the playoffs last year. A year later, Le'Veon Bell the night before the game, tweeting about the next week game. So there are things absolutely you can critique. To me, Mike Tomlin, though, you can also say this. There aren't 5 professional football coaches clearly better than him. No. And it cannot be a simply binary decision to fire Mike Tomlin or not to fire Mike Tomlin. Because if you go with option A, you then have to answer, who are we replacing him with? What are we replacing him with? And how big of a step backwards are we willing to take for an organization that is trying to win Super Bowls right now? They were 13-3 this year and were this far from being 14-2 in the 1 seed. To act as if this is a team that needs a major overhaul when they have been more consistent at this position than any team in all of pro sports over a half century, I think it's crazy it's even a discussion.
2 things. One, yes, they were 13-3 this year. 6 of those wins came against 3 relatively shoddy teams this year, right? The 0-16 Browns, the 7-9 Bengals, the 9-7 Ravens. In fact, that's because of the division they're in. Those are wins that come to them every single year. I know it's not an excuse, but it goes to show you they have the 3rd worst record, the 3rd easiest schedule in the NFL this past season. But you said he runs such a loose ship that sometimes it gets away from him. In order for that to change, if you don't think this is as easy as just making a coaching change, he needs to acknowledge that, and he needs to change a couple of things. Otherwise, you're going to have the exact same thing next year. There weren't a few distractions they had all season. Every week we were talking about, well, this one is arguing about playing time, and this one is arguing about getting, they want the ball more, and this one with his contract, and this one with social media. There was a lot. That doesn't change unless he changes that. So if you don't make a coaching change, then does he need to be, do you need to sit down with him and say, this organization needs to maybe be a little tighter, run a little bit better, and then you have a little bit more staying power as a head coach? Because if he doesn't change, your team doesn't change.
Well, first of all, I don't think Mike Tomlin is going anywhere, all right? They have a very good football team. He has been with the front office because there's a connectiveness there, that they have drafted well. They have done well in free agency, picking up a player like Joe Hayden from the Browns, where they need secondary help.
Developed players well. Antonio Brown wasn't the top pick of the draft.
That's one of the huge things about being a coach. Do I develop well? He's had one of the great quarterbacks, Ben Roethlisberger. Has he gotten out of Ben what he should? Yes, he has. But to get over the top, because you have New England, because New England is the standard. If New England wasn't around, we would be like, hey, man, keep Mike Tomlin. Like, we wouldn't have, and if they weren't in the AFC, he would have gone to probably a couple more Super Bowls. So it's any professional. Myself, I've been in this business a long time. I made changes as a broadcaster from last month. So I think everyone who's a high achiever, and I believe Mike is that, they are making adjustments. Is he public going to acknowledge that? That's not necessarily that important. But I believe, and I know a couple of the coaches there, that Pittsburgh is taking a look at themselves. You can't get to where they are. You can't achieve what they've achieved unless you set goals and you didn't make adjustments along the way. Mike Tomlin has changed the style for which they play football in Pittsburgh. They are an offensive-dominated, 3 wide receiver team. Mike came there, they were a defensive, man, go after the quarterback.
Right.
Man, create turnovers. So he's helped create a culture there that's very player-friendly. Now, sometimes it's a difference in being your boss and being your friend. And I think that sometimes the players take advantage of Mike and have crossed over the line of Mike and have taken, him being a player's coach for granted.
I want to address what you said, Jenna, because I think a lot of people believe it. This year, the AFC North, when you break it down like that, it can seem like those were 6 easy wins. But because this year it was so slanted towards the great teams being in the NFC, I think the AFC North was the hardest division in the AFC. Certainly harder than the AFC East, certainly harder than the AFC South. And with the AFC West, with the Broncos having a down year, the Raiders having a down year, it's neck and neck with the AFC West. You mentioned if Tomlin doesn't change, then the organization won't change.
Well, just that it's an easier option than changing coaches. Change the coach that you have, or tinker with the problems that you have.
This is what I can guarantee you before you get to that.
Yeah.
I can guarantee you, if you take option 1, you will not upgrade as a coach.
Well, but here's the other thing. The other person that could take ownership of this is a person that is a cause of an enormous amount of these distractions, and Ben Roethlisberger. Why are we talking about the offensive coordinator and whether or not you were supposed to spike the ball or not, Ben Roethlisberger? Why are we talking about whether or not the quarterback's going to retire? Because of what Ben Roethlisberger said. Why are we talking about whether or not you're allowed to quarterback sneak? Because of Ben Roethlisberger. So he has to take some ownership of that as well. But I want to end on this, one of my favorite things, one of these blind reveals, CC, because if you're going to fire Mike Tomlin, you got to, if Mike Tomlin was fireable, then we're going to have a long list of people that were fireable.
No, we can't do that.
Show me real quick, show me as side-by-side coaches. This is their careers as a head coach. The records, the guy on the left's a little bit better playoff appearances, guy on the left better playoff wins. You guys can see the whole thing, sub 500 years. Now, please show me who those coaches are. Mike Tomlin, Sean Payton.
What's wrong with Sean Payton's head?
We out here firing Sean Payton. The Florida Lee on the top, it makes it look like he has a mohawk.
Yeah.
That's all. We out here firing Sean Payton. It took Sean Payton 3 consecutive losing seasons to even be on the hot seat.
Yes.
Coming into this year, Sean Payton was on the hot seat because they were 7-9 3 years in a row. Mike Tomlin's never had a losing season.
Sean Payton, Andy Reid, you'll be adding a bunch of other coaches too. If Mike Tomlin is fireable at this point, I'll line him up.
Welcome back to First Things First. Cris Canny is with us. Morning, Cris.
What's going on, big man? Good to see you, brother.
What's going on, Nick? Good to see you, bro.
Everything good?
Everything is outstanding, Jenna. We got a little precipitation outside, but other than that, we all good.
Is it
Nice
rain?
way. It kind of makes it feel like it's okay.
Freezing rain. You know, it's real icy out there. We're not talking jewelry and Gucci Mane and Jeezy and all that.
Good job, sir.
Things I haven't said in a long time.
Exactly.
All right, well, inside we're talking football. Good news if you are a fan of NFC championship games. There happens to be one this weekend. Vikings at Eagles, and the Vikings are the favorites by 3 points. Nick Foles was able to lead Philadelphia to win over Atlanta, but the Eagles were held to just 15 points. Now he faces only the best defense of all the teams left playing. So there's that. Cris Canny, how can the Eagles offense break through against this very, very stingy Vikings defense?
First of all, Jenna, let's call this what this is. The Philadelphia Eagles offensive line and running backs can't match up with the Minnesota Vikings front seven. They just can't. They just can't. I mean, when you start looking at Linval Joseph and Everson Griffin, Aaron Kendricks and Anthony Barr, they're just better than that Eagles offensive front. So if
especially since Jason Peters has been done for the last 2 months.
Yeah, exactly. You're talking about Vitae, replacement left tackle. So when you start looking at the matchups, it doesn't bode well for the Philadelphia Eagles. So if you're Doug Peterson, if you ask your offense to run with direct runs, it's literally the head coach asking his offense to run into a brick wall. So you're going to have to avoid that. What you're going to have to do is challenge the eye discipline of those guys on the second and third level of that Minnesota Vikings defense. And you have things in your offense that you can do that with. The RPOs, the run-pass options. You saw it in the second and third quarters when Nick Foles had that play-action fake to the running back on a dive, and then you took advantage of the vacated area by the linebackers and threw the pop pass in that intermediate zone. So you're going to have to take advantage of those types of plays. You're going to have to be able to use stacks and bunches, different formations, motions. Look at what the Saints did to the Vikings in the second half of that divisional round matchup. In the fourth quarter, that first play where you had the toss action to Mark Ingram, but it was actually Alvin Kamara going the other way. If you look at the fake toss to Alvin Kamara, and then it was a pop pass to Michael Thomas for a touchdown, those are the types of things that you're going to have to do if you're Doug Peterson in order to get your playmakers in space and get some production.
Explain one thing to the audience. You said direct runs will be running directly into a brick wall. Yeah. Explain just for the audience the difference between a direct run and the things you're describing. What's a direct run?
Direct runs are typically in between the tackles. You're talking about dives, inside zones.
It's one of those plays when you're a sports fan, you're like, why'd they run that play?
You're right. Right up the middle or off the guard, inside the tackles is direct run.
Those are direct runs.
Okay, so you're saying they need to get out on the edges to have any shot against this Vikings front seven.
And not even really get out on the edges. I'm talking about play action fake with the perimeter runs, and then use passes, raise up now passes, throwing it out of the perimeter perimeter, 2 receivers in a stack, and being able to get those guys opportunities that way. Because football comes down to blocking and tackling. Eventually, if you have enough opportunities with your skill position players, one of those guys is going to break one. So that's what you got to look forward to if you're Doug Peterson. That's the only chance that you have to be able to win on the offensive side of the ball, because the matchups don't bode well for you in this game.
So here's why this is such a tough matchup for the Eagles. The Vikings, as CC mentioned almost just in passing in our morning meeting today, they are 14-3. So they've lost 3 times this year. All 3 of those losses have one thing in common. They allowed at least 90 yards rushing in each of those games. 2 of them, they allowed 100-plus yards rushing. They only did that 7 times all year, allow even 90 yards rushing. The one way to beat the team this year that has been a common component for their 3 losses is you have to have an effective ground game. What you're describing is that's going to be hard to come by for this Eagles team, but that's the only way I think they can score points, especially when you consider Philadelphia, the last 3 weeks since Nick Foles took over after the Giants game, this offense has scored 2 touchdowns. In 3 games, the Philadelphia offense has scored 2 touchdowns. So if they are going to pull off what I think would be a bigger upset than the one they pulled off in the first round, or the second round, but their first playoff game, it's 10-7. It's 13-9. It's going to be, to me, that the Eagles' defense is going to have to match the Vikings' defense, because I don't see how a Nick Foles-led Eagles offense, even with good but not great running backs, can get to 17, 20, 24 points on this Vikings D.
There's 3 things if I'm Philadelphia and their offense that I'm concerned with. The number one thing I'm concerned with, how do I block Linval Joseph? Now, you talking about a brick wall? Now, this is a grown man. Now, we say, all these guys are grown. He's the biggest.
No, he's different.
He's the biggest man on the field. He plays the nose tackle. He plays the 3 technique. And Mike Zimmer utilizes him to be able to set the tempo for this defense. If you don't see Kelsey, who is a undersized, and what makes Kelsey a good center is he's very athletic. He likes to get on the edge, but you can't snap the ball and get him on the edge, because Linval Joseph will be in his hip pocket and be in the backfield. The Vikings, they predicate this defense on penetration. The other thing, number 2, is Sendejo. Andrew Sendejo, when he gets hurt in the 3rd quarter of the Saints game, the safety, the game changed, because he is an unsung hero. All right, he allows the other safety to be able to roam, hitman to be able to play free and inside the box. He allows the corners to be able to play a lot of man-to-man. He directs a lot of traffic, so people don't know who he is. He is a significant player. He had a concussion. I did see him in the locker room after the game, talk to him. He looks to be healthy. Now, they haven't announced it yet, but look to see if he's healthy in this game. And the third thing is, and one of the reasons why this Vikings defense is special, is Trey Wayans. He's another first-round pick from Michigan State. Yep. Michigan State. He's the 3rd in his 3rd year. They got so many first-round picks on this defense. People don't talk about him. He's actually the fastest guy on the Vikings team. So you match him up on Torrey Smith. You put Xavier Rhodes, you put him on Alshon Jeffries, and to me, how are the Eagles going to make big plays? So they have to try to build manufacture through misdirection or either through play action pass with these matchups that the Vikings, and this is some of the personnel that the Vikings have. And as a fan, I like to, when you're down to 2 to 4 teams, get people familiar with some names that they don't know.
Well, okay, just listening to that, daunting. It's daunting, and I'm listening to it. If you're Nick Foles, what is the message to Nick Foles in this offense? I mean, if you're just talking about how just running the ball is going to be so hard, and we know where he is with passing the ball, what is the message to Nick Foles going into this?
Get the ball out of your hands as quickly as possible, because all I need to know about Nick Foles is the first play of that divisional round matchup with the Falcons when he threw that duck to Torrey Smith. Now, he got bailed out with a pass interference call, and that's great, but you can't rely on that, especially with this secondary. So what you're going to have to do is use the short passing game as an extension of the run game, being able to challenge those Vikings defenders in space, because when you line up to a man, they're not going to be able to beat those guys coming straight at them. They're just not. You got to take advantage of their aggressiveness. You got to challenge their fundamentals, and Doug Peterson has to do some things schematically to help his guys out.
I'm going to say another name, and I want to pull up what he did in the most recent game, and that's Zach Ertz. Zach Ertz, if you're a fantasy football player, you know the first 10, 12 weeks of the year was the most productive week-to-week non-quarterback in and then he got injured for a week. He then last quarter of the year, his production trailed off. Now, Carson Wentz was out, so people assigned that is the reason. In the first playoff game, Zach Ertz had 3 catches for 32 yards. They were all 10 or 11-yard plays, okay? So that's what he did. For them to have any shot, I know we're going to talk about Alshon Jeffrey. I know we're going to talk about Torrey Smith. Zach Ertz has to cause some mismatch problems because that is a guy you can get the ball out too quickly. That is a guy that can come off the line, have a linebacker on him, and you can hit him for an 8-yard gain, see if you can make somebody miss. He has to be a mismatch.
It's all in theory.
Yeah,
but the Purple have Harrison Smith, first-team All-Pro.
100%.
Now, I'm sure he can cover Ertz.
Yep. No, again, I think we're all in agreement that it's going to be very difficult for the Eagles to make any moves on the Vikings defense. If they do, the playmakers on the edge that you were referring to have to make big plays.
All right, moving on to the AFC title game. Oh, Patriots hosting the Jacksonville Jaguars. Let's play some compare and contrast. One team has been in this game every year since 2011, won 5 Super Bowls with their current quarterback, and has a Hall of Fame head coach. The other team, guaranteed victory. Well, Jalen Ramsey did anyway. Here's Tom Brady addressing Ramsey's comments.
You know, I think what I've learned over a long time is it's how you play and it's not what you say. And I think, you know, everyone has different ways of handling things. Coaches do, players do. We do what works for us. Those are other players that work for them. You know, the game's going to be decided by who plays the best, not who hypes the best or speaks the best. Or, you know, he's a really good player. I've watched a ton of film on him. Got a lot of strengths, and you know, he's obviously very confident. That's reflected in how he plays. So, you know, I'm more concerned about how he plays as opposed to what he says.
And that has always been the Patriot way, play, don't say. But let's talk about how Tom Brady and his Patriots are going to attack this very, very good Jaguars defense, CC.
It's going to be interesting what they do. Now, I think that A.J. Bouye and Jalen Ramsey will get the ultimate respect by Bill Belichick. So what they'll try to do, they'll try to line up in a lot of bunch formations or clusters where they can set a lot of picks. They're going to be expecting a lot of man-to-man. They know they have the athleticism. If these corners played for New England, man, that's all New England would play because they realize how hard it is for quarterbacks to throw. When you're in zone coverage, guys are like this in space. The man-to-man, there's very little space, and the DB and the wide receiver, it frustrates quarterback, and they don't want to release the ball. So he's going to respect that. Watch Rob Gronkowski try to be the dominant force in the middle because you're better off attacking Jacksonville's safeties than you are their corners. And watch the running backs. They will try to get them in space because also they don't want to put that offensive line in the dilemma of dropping back 45 times and having to block Calais Campbell and those other vicious defenders that Jacksonville can send at you. Also in the back of their mind, New England knows that Blake Bortles is the quarterback. All right, so Tom, he will not force a turnover. He knows that they can punt the ball. He's going to have plenty of time, so he won't be rushed. It won't be like Pittsburgh. If he was playing Pittsburgh, Ben Roethlisberger, the triplets, it's a different set of pressure because they can put a lot of points on you. So Tom will be very, very patient. Gronk and the running backs, I believe, will be the featured part of this offense, and I wouldn't be surprised if they negated the running game, New England. I believe the weather's going to be unseasonably a little bit warm, and I believe they're going to throw the ball more than we ever thought going into this game.
All right, before I get to my thoughts on it, it is something we touched on yesterday, but I want to reiterate it today, get your opinion out there on this, because the general conventional wisdom, I know you tell me, stop listening to all these podcasts, stop doing all that.
No, listen to me.
Okay, right.
Stop listening
But the
to them.
general, a lot of the commentary surrounding this game is the Jags are going to put Jalen Ramsey on Gronk. Their best defensive back on the Patriots' best weapon. Jalen's also a big corner. He's 6'1". He's strong. That's their best chance. That was something you told me Monday morning off the air. Throw it away. They can't do that continually throughout the game. Tell them, why can't you just say Jalen, Gronk, one-on-one, Jalen be better?
Because Jalen is more important to the defense playing the cornerback spot that he plays, because then they can play zone or play man, and you don't know that. If you line him up on Gronk and play man-to-man, 50, 60 plays, Tom Brady knows you're in man-to-man. So it's easier to set a pick on him. It's also easier to use Gronk as a decoy because you know exactly what they're doing. And more importantly than Jalen being on Gronk, you know everyone else is in man-to-man. So Tom can pick out the weakest link. It could be a linebacker, it could be a safety, it could be someone else that he would pick on deliberately because you've given him too much information.
And the other thing you had mentioned was if they were to do that, the Pats would just run the ball repeatedly. That you'd be
Gronk would knock him off the field, because he would have to line up on his head if he's guarding a man-to-man, and Gronk would come off and run block him, and like he blocked the guy in Indianapolis where he threw him out the club.
Right, yeah.
That's what he would be doing to Jalen Ramsey a whole bunch in the game.
One of the things we talked about the last couple weeks with this Patriots team is they want to get out to a fast start, get out there, maybe no huddle, whatever it is. But you're saying that's not as important this time. It is not absolutely necessary for them to get out and do that. They could slow the game down from the start.
I mean, as a team, no one collectively is connected as much as the offense, the defense, and the special teams. So their offensive players, they know what their capability of, even though they're worried about their game plan, Jacksonville's defense, but they've been informed of who's on the other side.
Right.
And it's not to throw shade at Blake Bortles. If it was someone else that didn't have an offense that ran through their quarterback and ran through their tailback, they would do the same thing. So they'll be in sync, realizing it's about field position, it's about getting a lead, it's about forcing Jacksonville to throw the football, and it's about, for New England, getting chunks of yardage on first down. So they stay out of second and long and third and long situations.
The Jags defense, I'll just put a bow on it with this, is coming off its 2 most productive games of the year as far as a quarterback pressure standpoint. You might say they still had 42 points. I get that. The only 2 games all year, the only 2 games in the defense in the playoffs, I should say, where you had 20-plus pressures. It was the Jags in round 1 and the Jags last week. So that Jags front is playing very, very well right now. They are going to have to play the best game they have ever played in order to beat the New England Patriots.
All right.
Cece's got a meeting.
Yeah, you got to run.
Important secret meeting with the NFL.
I don't know if is it a secret meeting?
No, it's just a meeting with the NFL.
It was secret.
Welcome back here on First Things First. We're joined by former NBA General Manager Billy King. What's up, Billy?
Not too much. How are you guys doing?
We are great. Lots of basketball news and notes and drama swirling around. So we're glad you're here to help break it down for all of us. Billy, if I told you there was an NBA team that had lost 9 of their last 12 games, that had an aging roster, that was ranked 28th defensively and had a ton of lineup questions, would you bet on that team to win the NBA title? Oh, you don't bet? I get that. Much respect. Much respect. Would you guess that team would go to the NBA Finals? Come on, Cece. That team is the Cleveland Cavs, and that sentiment is quietly being expressed by a few of the players on that team. According to multiple reports, several prominent players are doubting the Cavs' title chances this season. Billy King, is this the beginning of the end of LeBron in Cleveland?
Before you answer that, as far as the Jenna and her read there, Jenna this weekend placed her first wager. Oh, boy. All right, so what she really wanted to ask you is, if you were a betting person, which she's not, but she dabbled in it, would you be betting on LeBron to stay in Cleveland, or is this just the normal kind of precursor
Better
to a
said than
breakup?
I could. As good as anyone could say it. Better than I could.
I think it's the normal in Cleveland. I think you got to remember, LeBron missed all of training camp, and that's when they struggled out of the gate. Now they get Isaiah Thomas back. He's played 5 games, and they struggle. Defensively, they're not going to be a great defensive team. They're going to be a team that's got to score the basketball. But I would not bet against LeBron. Every time LeBron gets out there, people say he's getting old. I don't know if Miami can get back to the finals. He keeps getting there. I think this team, you have veteran guys. They know the long road. They know how long it's going to take to get to the finals, how long the playoffs take. And they start playing basketball when you get late January, starting February, because they understand it. They don't need to get the number 1 seed as they proved last year. They just got to get in the playoff with home court advantage and be healthy.
I think with the Cavs, they have 8 new players. Would you be concerned that there's only a handful of guys that have done that with LeBron? Like, they've added some other names that, you know, with these reports coming to reporters, you've been around teams long enough as a player and manager to understand that some of this, there's always some truth. But how much faith do I have faith in LeBron? Nick, stop. You got faith in LeBron. What's wrong with the back end of this roster not having faith in LeBron?
Well, like you said, once the new guys, they start talking because they don't understand the situation, they don't understand LeBron. So they talk a little bit more. They may chirp to their friends. They may chirp to the media, and that's how a lot of this stuff gets out. The J.R. Smiths, the Shumperts, those guys, they understand what it takes to get to the final. They've been there. So those guys, you may find those guys be moved on. You may see them move a couple guys, cut some guys, add some veterans, because what happens in this season, veteran guys get bought out because they start looking, I don't like the roster I'm on. Let's see, where can I go?
Yeah.
And that's when players start recruiting guys.
Oh, okay.
Hey, come here, come play for us. We can get you bought out. So I think, just, it's too early. I want to see Isaiah Thomas play with them. Defensively, they're atrocious. I understand that. But I think offensively, they're pretty good. And I think when you get in the playoffs, teams focus in a little more. So they've got to be healthy going into the playoffs.
It is. I don't want to say it's easy to improve your defense in the playoffs. Not dramatically, not overhaul it. But it's damn near impossible to improve your offense in the playoffs. Like, your offense typically is what it's going to be, and it's going to struggle a little bit more because other teams...
And you have to play more half court.
More half court. Other teams are more locked in. You're going to get fewer easy buckets. The Cavs' offense has been the constant. And you mentioned they're 28th in defense. That actually means they moved up a ranking. Because they were 29th at the beginning of the week.
I thought they were 30th.
Yeah, and so Sacramento Kings, the only team that was beneath them beginning of the week. Last year, from the All-Star game to the end of the regular season, they were 29th in defense. Then come the playoffs, they were 3rd in defense. Now, that obviously was not good enough to beat Golden State, by the way. Bless you. This year, they're 28th now in defense. We'll see if it gets better. But I do want the audience to do something of a thought exercise. What if right before the season we found out Kyrie Irving was, by the way, never traded, none of that came up, tore up his knee and was done for the year? Would you say the Cavs are okay if they're in 3rd in the East, close to the All-Star break?
Yeah.
That's a sin, because I know they got stuff for Kyrie Irving, but it's not paying dividends yet. One's the Nets pick. That's obviously not paying dividends. One's Jay Crowder. He's been terrible. And the other's Isaiah Thomas, who just started playing. Like, they lost their second-best player and have not gotten any return from it. So, of course, there's going to be some tumultuous nature of this part of the season, at least in my eyes.
Well, I agree. And that's the thing, but it's a great story to talk about. I think right now everybody's looking, when they went on their run, had the great run, people are, they're back. Now they struggle because Isaiah's back. It is very difficult when players miss training camp. The one thing, Boston had, I think, 11 new players, but they all were in training camp. So they will practice that whole 27 days, get themselves right. Cleveland, LeBron wasn't there. And also, you take your best player, missed training camp. Now he comes back. The first month of the season was training camp for him. Now this is training camp for Isaiah Thomas. They're trying to figure out, how does he play? How does he want to have the basketball? So I'm not worried about them right now because I think they have LeBron. And now these other guys, and you got guys like Korver, they're older. So they understand it's a long haul. And so as they get going, when the playoffs start, that's when they'll start focus. Once these games get on national TV, later after the All-Star break, then guys realize the big games they start playing.
You said you're not concerned about IT. You believe that over a course of maybe 15, 20 games that he'll get back. Do you have more concern for Kevin Love?
Well, that's always been the concern for Kevin Love. I just think that Kevin really has never really fit with them because when he was in Minnesota, he had the basketball all the time. He could pick and pop. He can do his thing. Here, he's only getting a certain amount of touches. You're number one receiver. You want the ball thrown to you a lot so you can get your timing.
Yeah, it would help.
And in basketball, when Kevin Love in Minnesota, he knew if he missed his first 5, he was getting 5 more quickly.
Right. When they won 18 out of 19. Kevin Love was playing the best basketball that we had saw.
Right before Isaiah came back.
Does that concern you? Because we thought he had finally fit in. But then they bring back another superstar and trying to acclimate him now. I see Kevin Love's productivity has gone down in the process.
I think that's Kevin's personality. He's like, okay, we got to get Isaiah. I'm just going to stand back and wait and figure it out. Rather than say, look, I need my shots. I think he's a good team player, and I'm not going to cause any waves because he is not one of the main guys. But I do think they got to figure out how to get him involved with the offense. I think run pick and roll with Isaiah and Kevin Love because he can pick and pop. Take the ball to LeBron James' hands. That's the other thing that LeBron has not done is taking the basketball out of his hands and let other guys handle it and maybe work off the basketball a little bit. That's going to be on the coach now, how to figure out how to incorporate all these pieces within the offense.
That's the question I was going to ask you. One of the things that these two guys talk about a lot is how do you see this starting lineup looking in the next, say Isaiah's back in it? Who are the pieces that make this work and work well? Because I don't think they even know yet what their lineup is going to look like.
Like, I think Kevin Love's got to play the 5 and just put him at the 5, let him take advantages of the mismatches. They may be small, but let him take advantage of those mismatches and go. They got to go smaller and be more athletic because the problem when they're bigger, they're not as athletic as other teams. So I think you got to put Kevin Love and play him more at 5 and take advantage of mismatches there. They've got to move their lineup. The piece I'm not sure that really fits for them is Tristan Thompson.
I was going to ask you that.
And
do you see him on this team after the trade deadline?
I don't think so. If they can get something for him to help them, I don't think so because, Tristan's a great rebounder, defender, but I think he doesn't space the floor for them enough. And I think offensively, even when they penetrate and give it to him, he's not as good a finisher as them.
Tristan hasn't gotten better. Listen, people gave the Cavs a hard time because after that first finals run, they gave Tristan $70 million. And then the cap exploded and that contract didn't look so bad because you anticipated, okay, this guy's a good defender. He can switch. He's a great offensive rebounder. His offensive game will develop. Hasn't developed at all. Yeah. He is the exact same guy he was 3 years ago. And for a guy his age, top 5 pick of a draft, that's not positive. Now, what they trade him for, what they get for him, we'll see. But one thing we do know, the Cavs have gotten something at the deadline. They got Shump, JR, and Mozgov 3 years ago. They got Channing 2 years ago and fired their coach. Last year, they got Kyle Korver. They've always made some move at the deadline. And this year, they have the extra asset of that Nets pick if they want to include that in a major, major deal.
And that's why I think Tristan Thompson's probably the piece you can move. Because if you look at a lot of these teams, their 4 guys are guys that can pick and pop. If you look at Boston, they've got guys that can stand out and shoot. You look at Philadelphia. So they've got to get somebody that can space the floor offensively. They're not going to be a great defense team, but they got to get better offense and get better spacing.
Tristan hadn't gotten better since he hooked up with the Kardashians.
I knew you were going to go there.
He might have leaked it, too, because they leaked some stuff.
Jeff Van Gundy says you're Kardashian shaming and should be ashamed of yourself, Cece.
And finally, you remember this story. Isaiah Thomas was going to get a video tribute in Boston earlier this month, but he was resting that night and asked to wait till next time. No problem. What's the big deal? Well, here's the big deal. The next time happens to be the night Paul Pierce is having his jersey retired, and Pierce is not interested in sharing the spotlight. Now, Pierce is adding insult to injury. Pierce says the only reason the Celtics were even having a tribute for Isaiah was because they felt bad about trading him. It was a guilt move, he says. Nick, you got a problem with how Pierce is handling all this?
Because now they're not going to play the tribute video to IT anymore.
Right.
But Paul Pierce had according to Paul Pierce, a 40-minute phone call with Danny Ainge about this. Man, when's the last time I was on the phone for 40 minutes about anything? I can't remember. A 40-minute phone call in which Ainge did, again, according to Paul Pierce, said, listen, Paul, if it's really that big of a deal, we won't do the video.
And he said?
And Paul said, okay, good, don't do the video. Are you out of your mind? Now, Isaiah Thomas, since he tweeted, I'd like to thank the Celtics for their gracious offer to play a video tribute on February 11th, celebrating my 3 years in Boston. But since it appears this has caused some controversy with Paul Pierce's night, I'd ask the Celtics to instead focus all their attention on number 34's career. This is one of the most insanely petty things I've ever seen a future Hall of Famer do and what Paul Pierce is doing. It's 90 seconds for Isaiah Thomas. The reason they didn't play it the first time wasn't just he wasn't playing. IT's family wasn't there.
Right.
I can't imagine why Paul Pierce is such an issue with it, but now I guess he's getting what he wanted.
Also, not only Paul Pierce, but they asked Rondo, about the tribute to IT, and he said, wow, they're celebrating that now in Boston? So there are former Celtics that think that they've changed the standard, and I haven't been on Paul Pierce's side of this thing, but I got to say the truth might have delivered the truth here as far as IT and Danny Ainge. I believe there is a little guilt there because you only played 3 years with a franchise. I mean, what type of celebration are they going to really, what did you do that was so celebratory that they should have something like this, something that they typically don't have? They didn't have anything for Rondo.
They gave Jay Crowder a video. Jay Crowder got a video.
Because he was part of the trade. They knew what they were trying to do. If Jay Crowder wasn't part of the trade, do you think they would have had a video?
What? No.
So that's guilt.
Okay.
So the truth did drop a truth.
Okay, but first of all, Paul Pierce's jersey is being retired after the game. This does not take away from his night at all. In fact, it adds to the night. But you take
advantage of the crowd that's there. It's not only after the game, all right? It's before the game and everything. No, I think that they could still be done in the same time.
Yeah.
But if the organization has changed the way they're honoring players, that should be recognized. And Rondo and Paul Pierce, who have great careers in Boston, they think that it's different. I've never played in Boston. I have had tributes done to me. So I have to listen to what they're saying. And Paul Pierce brings up a great point that it's not his fault. This is the Celtic and Danny Ainge's fault. They the one traded him.
Listen, fine. But let's all... Isaiah Thomas last year was a cult hero in that town. Boston fans were chanting MVP for this guy from the All-Star break on. He had the best individual season any Celtic has had since Kevin Garnett in that uniform. The highest MVP finish any Celtic has had since Larry Bird, other than 1 year of Kevin Garnett. Isaiah last year.
And after doing all that, you know what they did, Nick?
They traded
told him you can work elsewhere.
Right.
Okay.
They should have just done it the first time around. I know his family and everything wasn't there, but they should have just done it.
You can't do that, Jen. I disagree with that because if his wife and kids can't be there.
But now he doesn't get anything.
Well, so what is he missing?
Right.
I mean,
well, he could have had something, and now he's
but
not
his
getting
family,
anything.
it means more to the family than it does to the player. And Isaiah's moved on.
He requested that they wait. That's why they didn't do it. He said, hey, I'm not playing, my family's not coming, can you wait? The Celtics said, yeah, of course. What could possibly be the problem? Little did they know the truth. Paul Pierce thinks that that's going to be declared Paul Pierce Day in Boston, that they're going to announce the Paul Pierce Cumming statue, that they're going to retire. The whole thing is an absurdity.
And the big loser in all this that I don't think anyone is talking about is the poor guy that edited the video tribute. Like, what about that guy? He must have spent so many hours. Now what do you do with the tribute? We can discuss that later, maybe in a commercial break or never. Moving on, it has been a rough couple of weeks for the NBA. Lately, box scores have looked like this. Buckets made, rebounds grabbed, and punches thrown. FYI, rumor has it Ron Artest was padding that last stat his whole career. Last night in the Magic T-Wolves game, Aaron Aflalo took a huge swing at Nemanja Bjelica, and both players were subsequently tossed from the game. Another night, another fight. Here's Bjelica telling his side of the story.
First of all, I don't want to feel like I'm a victim here. I mean, that's everything part of the game, but he took a swing on me, and I was just trying to protect myself first of all, and to help him. I mean, to calm him down, because he was wild. I don't know what's wrong with that guy, but and at that point, I mean, if you attack me like that, I just have to protect myself or my family.
All right, Cece, you brought this up a couple days ago and have continued to it. Does the NBA have some sort of fighting problem right now?
Well, I don't. Just reacting to the players. The temperament of the players is at a different level than I've seen. Now, I grew up watching the NBA in the 80s and the 90s. It was far more physical, and I mean, there's some people that really, really got hurt. But I'm talking about with this group that we see. Like what we've seen the last 10 years, this group right now is the most volatile, the most confrontational. The only time that there's really any type of peace at the NBA game is before they snap it off, they put some powder on them, they wipe their shoes off, and they shake hands with each other. After that, it's nothing but a bunch of complaining, a bunch of mean staring, a bunch of just stuff that I'm not used to seeing with the NBA. Like, guys have always complained about fouls. But now, seeing what it spews over to last night in the Orlando game. Like, it's not necessary. If I'm a fan, I don't want to see guys fighting. Like, there was no need for them to be fighting. One guy was going to the hole. He might have hit him with a little forearm, but to take that type of punch at a guy, you could really hurt someone.
That was a real swing. That was a real swing of follow through. Go ahead, Jenna.
Is there anything to be said, or is there any sort of correlation to be made between guys who've seemingly been so frustrated with refs this season and taking it out on each other?
Well, that's almost the conclusion I would draw. I do think there's a correlation to what's going on with the officials. So the officials and the players are meeting at the All-Star break to try to have some type of peace treaty, because the players, the superstars in this league as a whole, have never been more frustrated with the referees, not in my memory. And what I do think we are seeing in the league is right now, the toughest thing a referee can do to a player is give him a technical foul or a flagrant foul. The referees are much more liberal with technicals given out for bad conduct towards them than bad conduct towards other players. And what you're seeing is, in my eyes, from a guy that watches League Pass every night, is referees not taking control of games early to try to diffuse some of these things, which would be one thing if they weren't simultaneously one technical throwing guys out for saying sideways things to them. Like, the referees are protecting themselves and their own sensibilities a hell of a lot better than they're protecting the players. Now, that was not the case last night. Last night, Aflalo just seemed to snap, like he just lost it. I mean, that was a very dangerous punch he threw. But as far as systemically the bigger issue, yes, I think the overall level of officiating does have something to do with it.
And this fight comes one day after Martin Luther King Day, where all these games are highlighted. You got 20 technicals. You got 5 ejections. And I brought it up in the meeting yesterday, and let alone I'm watching League Pass last night, and this breaks out. So for me, as a fan, as a consumer of their product, there is a problem. Because I do not tune into NBA League Pass to watch UFC. That's not what I'm interested in.
Here's the thing, though, CC. Every other sport allows a level of fighting. And so you can say that.
Where are they fighting in the NFL?
Man, we see not that type of punching, but we see guys slap someone's face mask or do like an open-handed thing to the helmet and get a 15-yard penalty once every other game.
Yeah, and 2 of those get you thrown out of the game.
Right.
And you do have protection.
Correct. Agree. But there is.
But that's not fighting.
Well,
that's not fighting.
That's the level of fighting most.
That's a level of fighting I ain't heard of.
Well, most NBA fights don't get to this level. Most NBA fights get to about the level.
It gets to what? They're not fighters, though.
Well, so hold on. So baseball, fighting's part of the sport. Like, we just accept it. Like, you throw at me, we're going to clear benches, we're going to clear dugouts, we're going to do the whole thing. Hockey, obviously a huge part of it. NASCAR, we see fighting on pit row. Like
UFC?
Well, obviously. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, but the boxing and UFC, yes, because it's part and parcel with the sport. But extracurricular fighting is a part of every sport, and it used to be a part of the NBA. The NBA legislated it out, most notably after the Malice in the Palace, but they were starting to do it before that with the rule about guys coming off the bench. These guys also have been criticized for the AAU culture, everyone being buddy-buddy. The NBA's soft now. Now, maybe it's
These are 2 international players.
What? Well, that's fine, Cece. Again, I don't think we're just talking about last night, right? We're not just talking about last night, are we?
No, we're talking about the totality of it. Yes, we're talking about the totality of it.
So, this is... I don't know what the NBA does about it, but I also know that, like, you seem more bothered by fighting in sports than I think most sports fans are.
Well, it affects the product, all right? It does not enhance the product. It's not as if you leave an NBA game with all these technicals or someone's thrown out of the game. It enhances. It's about skill. You know, that's what basketball is about. It's not about fighting. Fighting has nothing to do with it. Now, sometimes do you have to defend yourself in sports? Yes. But it's a bad look for the NBA that is gaining traction in as far as popularity. That's my concern, and it's a sport that I love. And if I'm not comfortable with it, I'm going to say it, and that's where I am.
You don't have an issue with fighting in sports.
I just think I think when you got grown men that are playing contact sports, there's going to be a level of this. Now,
yeah. Also, we're talking about professional grown men being paid a lot of money. You know what? To have some type of self-control. Wow, that's what they should have.
And I want to make this clear. I did have an issue with what Aaron Aflalo did last night. He really could have hurt him. That could have been a devastating.
And he really tried to hurt him.
But that was a much more dramatic swing than we almost ever see in NBA games. Like the Serge Ibaka-James Johnson thing from last week was noteworthy because there was an actual punch thrown.
Yeah, we actually had a posse go from one locker room into another locker room, Nick, and then we get one guy throw a haymaker at another guy. Yeah, that's what I'm consuming. All right, NBA League Pass. That's what I bought that for. That's what I purchased it for.
I'm Jenna Wolfe, and thank you for listening to the First Things First podcast. Make sure to subscribe and tell your friends, family, and coworkers about the podcast, which, by the way, is available on iTunes and all your favorite podcast apps. You can catch a fresh new episode every Monday through Friday on FS1, starting at 6:30 a.m. Eastern, 3:30 a.m. Pacific. So long, everyone.